Hello, everyone. My name is Anubhav Jain. I'm from Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and I'm happy to be giving a talk today to give an overview of Duramat software tool development. This represents work from many people at the different national labs working together on various projects. So let me start off by saying a little bit about why I even give a talk on software development. Since the end product of most conventional funded research is either a paper or a report or a conference presentation, and this is typically how projects are evaluated. What I'd like to make the case for is that software can also be an invaluable end product. And I'll give an example on the right. So this was a study recently conducted by Dirk Jordan and colleagues. And what they tried to do was to ask a bunch of analysts, so in this case, between 4 and 10 analysts, to analyze the degradation rate of 5 different PV systems. And in one test, they said, okay, just do it however you'd like to do it, the preferred way. And they found that these different analysts, in this case, 6 of them, had very different estimates of degradation rates for the same system, meaning that the analysis of degradation was really not reproducible at all. Then in the second test, they basically gave them a description of the type of analysis that should be done. And that did reduce the variance of the degradation rates that the analysts came up with, but still, you get values all over the place in terms of the degradation rate. Then finally, they used a standard software package called RD Tools. They asked all the analysts to use this package. And they actually found that basically all the analysts get the same answer for the degradation rate if you were to actually use the software package. So what this means is that the software package is really the most powerful tool for ensuring reproducible research in things like degradation analysis. As a side note, I'll mention that apart from software, data can also be an important end product. And maybe Robert White will talk more about that in his poster on the Duramat Data Hub. So with the importance of software established, I just want to say that Duramat is actually developing software to solve a spectrum of PV problems. We're developing core functions that are common to lots of different PV analysis workflows. We're developing software related to analyzing operation and degradation in the field. And finally, we're developing software for more techno-economic analyses, such as planning and reduction of LCOE. There's some common DNA between all the different Duramat projects. So there are like common thread lines between them. The first thing is that they are open source packages. So typically they're MIT licenses or Berkeley licenses, which are commercial friendly and 2 of the most open licenses that exist. They're all based on Python and the PyData stack, so they're typically interoperable with one another. So we're not mixing some MATLAB scripts with some Python stuff, with some Java code, with some Excel macros and things. We are kind of unified on this front. The packages, many of them make use of large data sets and are starting to incorporate machine learning and statistical learning in their approach. And then we're also doing collaborative and sustainable development through GitHub. So all the packages are using GitHub as the way to expose the code as well as to collaborate with one another. And we're actually working on more ways to integrate some of these codes with one another. So for example, we started a repo called PV Terms. And this is actually a way to try to unify different variable names between these different packages. So one doesn't call it maximum irradiance, another one calls it irradiance max or something, to just make things even a bit smoother to use. So with that, let me step through some of the software packages, what they do, and give you an overview so that you can check them out in more detail in their respective poster presentations. The first one we'll talk about is called PV Analytics. This is part of the PVLib software tools ecosystem, and it's being led by Cliff Hansen at Sandia. This is really a Python library that helps you do lots of different types of downstream analyses. And one of the challenges of doing data analysis in PV is that the devil is really in the details, as we showed with that first example. Little small differences in the way that you do the data processing can end up having an outsized influence on the end result. And so what PV Analytics does is it helps you do lots of different types of quality control. It helps you figure out which data might be, poor data because the irradiance and weather just doesn't make sense, or there's outliers, and it helps you interpolate if needed. It helps you identify certain features in your data as well as system properties, so you can identify the tilt and azimuth of your mountings from your power data. You can differentiate between fixed and tracking PV systems similarly as well. And you can also do metric calculation like performance ratio. So these are all core functions that can be used in many different analysis things downstream. Another data processing tool is called the PVPro data preprocessor. This is being led by Bennett Myers and is really an offshoot of some of the solar data tools libraries that he's been writing for a little while now. And you can see a visualization of a really nice visualization of PV operation and at the top here, where you have multiple years of data, 7 years of data on the x-axis, and you can look at all the times for that data on the y-axis. And then the color shows you the measured power for this particular operation. And what this data preprocessor can do is actually examine this data, examine this complex spectrum, and classify each of these data points into different classes and say, okay, this is the point at which it's operating at maximum. These are the points where it's operating at maximum power point. This is when the system is at open circuit or curtailed, et cetera. So at the bottom, you can see that this data has been colored by the type of operation mode that it's in. And then depending on the type of analysis you're doing, you can essentially restrict your data to only that class that you care about, and then it will prevent all the outliers and noise that you get from including different classes in your data. Moving on to sort of the operation and degradation analyses. So one code that we're developing at LBL led by Todd Karen is called PVPro. And the idea there is to use operation data, so things that you already have in PV installations. Ideally, these are things like irradiance, cell temperature or ambient temperature, and also voltage and current of your systems. And from this historical operating data to actually extract details of what's going on in the modules and in the strings. And so by fitting a single diode module, you can actually get parameters like the series resistance, the short circuit current, all of these things, shunt resistance, whatever, as a function of time. And you can see, maybe a system is degrading because the series resistance seems to be increasing over time, which is a level of analysis that you wouldn't get by just looking at the power, for example. And so this is a code that we've been testing pretty extensively on both synthetic data as well as some real data as well, and seeing that there's some matchup between what you get from PVPro type analysis as well as what you would get if you actually had full string measuring tools installed on your site. Sorry, full IV curve measuring tools on your site. The next code regarding operation and degradation is PVOps. This is being led by Tushara Gunda at Sandia. And the idea here is that there is a lot of information in operational logs. But often these operational logs are very difficult to read and difficult to search through and difficult to analyze because they're written in a sort of shorthand, which is not even a universal shorthand. And it's all over the place. And so this team is actually trying to use natural language processing tools as well as other types of techniques to actually make sense of all these different notes and put that into a structured data format. So you can see in the middle an example of a report that says an inverter hasn't been reporting since a certain time. And you can see, for example, the date 6 p.m. 26 is not very structured. But then some of the modules like text to time and PVOps will actually try to make sense of these things and actually put them into a structured format so that when you actually look at the final data, you can identify under which periods was this thing under maintenance, under which periods was there a problem, and maybe filter those out or at least examine them in more detail. Another code related to operation and degradation is called PVARC, ARC standing for anti-reflective coating. This is really designed to measure the thickness and degradation of coatings that depend on destructive interference techniques. The way that it works is that you can actually easily perform a field measurement of the reflectance spectrum of a module. You can also even just look at the color of the module with a cell phone camera or a little bit fancier camera. And from that information, you can actually get pretty detailed understanding of what the film behavior is like. You can actually model the thickness of the film as well as the porosity of the film. And so what PVARC does is it actually allows you to start with these measurement data and fit things like thickness and porosity that allows you to understand your film over time. So this method is being written up now. It's in press at JPV, and then the corresponding code base to do the analysis is online. Finally, for operation and degradation, at LBL, we have a project led by Xin Chen, and this is actually trying to do crack detection and defect detection in solar cells and modules from electroluminescence images. So on the left, you see kind of more high resolution type electroluminescence images. This is being done in collaboration with EPRI and NREL. And what this PV vision tool will do is it will automatically segment out and crop out the individual cells from the module, and then it will automatically identify certain classes of defects and features on the cells. So what you see in that image is in the purple, you have cracks. In the gray, you have power loss areas. In the brown, you have bus bars detected. And it can do this with a relatively high degree of accuracy, about 90%, and F1 of 0.86 over thousands and thousands of cells. From that detection, we've actually started to do further analysis and actually look at different crack features, like what's the length of the cracks, the orientation, et cetera. And the goal here is to actually see how cracks evolve with time in response to certain external stressors. On the right is the same PV vision tool trained on a slightly different data set. This is more operational type, more high throughput type analysis of electroluminescence images. The idea here is that we actually look at lower resolution modules, but we actually look at the entire module at once if needed, and we can actually circle which cells have certain classes of defects and compile statistics on how many modules are damaged, how many modules have a certain type of defect, et cetera, and what's the statistical likelihood of seeing certain types of defects. So we're writing up some of that work now and analyzing that in collaboration with an industrial partner. So moving on to planning and LCOE. So we have a project led by Brittany Smith at NREL. And the idea of this project is to really give you a very easy to use method for looking at how different parameters affect overall LCOE. So for example, if you have some kind of a module technology that increases your cell costs by a certain amount, but also reduces degradation by a certain amount, how do you know if that is a worthwhile technology in terms of LCOE? Normally, this might be like, pages upon pages of Excel sheets that all depend on one another in order to figure this out. But if you're just trying to answer simple questions, this calculator can actually do it extremely quickly and give you a really rough sense for, and really quick sense for, at what point do these things maybe break even? And you can compare, one technology versus another versus a baseline in a very simple way. So if you're doing any sort of simple techno-economic analysis, I highly encourage you to check out this tool. And finally, I'll highlight a code base we're developing called VOC Max. This is a string length calculator being led by Todd Karen at Berkeley Lab. And the idea here is that, we had some thoughts that conventional string length calculations are unnecessarily conservative. You could probably fit more modules in a string without necessarily going too high in voltage. And so we developed a site-specific modeling method where you actually give a location where you're going to put your PV installation. We'll look up all the historical data of what the temperature records look like, what the irradiance patterns look like, et cetera. And then given your module technology and some other details, we'll actually model using PVLib what the actual voltage profile will look like over time. And then from that, create a histogram of what expected voltages we'll see under open circuit conditions, as well as maximum power in that location. From that, you can actually draw cutoffs and say, okay, here's a sufficiently conservative way where we don't expect to exceed this voltage with any really statistical likelihood, and then use that to design a more reasonable string length and actually pack more modules onto a string, thereby reducing the LCOE. So this is available as a GitHub package as well as a web tool online, and it's been used by many different independent engineers over the past few months to help in their planning. So finally, in conclusion, I'll say that in addition to papers and reports, software data represent important outputs for research. Duramet has a very diverse portfolio of software development projects across the chain of PV operation. As I mentioned, a lot of the software has common DNA like open source, use of Python, very collaborative, et cetera. And we've been working on more and more integration between these packages. And finally, we'd be very happy to hear from you if you're able to try these packages, encounter issues, have ideas for new features. We'd really love to hear more about what you think. Thank you.